Alright, another quick video here, hopefully with some helpful information for some people. So, got the transmission out of the 73 Camaro, and the torque converter I had in it was just too tight. So it was actually the Summit 2698 converter, which is like a 2800 to 3000 stall, but it was always on the tight side. It was like 2800, and for this engine combination, it was just too tight. Even the other engine combination, it was too tight, but it was a cheap converter that I just threw in it at the time, knowing that I'd upgrade it later. Well, the long story short is I got a JEGS converter, so the XHD, the 3800 to 4100 RPM with the billet front half. So it's the billet converter that's good for up to 800 horsepower. So a little bit much for this combination, but I figured if I ever add more power, it'd be nice to have a nice converter in it. Well, that really became a bit of a nightmare. So the problem was I got the converter in, put the transmission up in place, and one of the first things I always check, just because I've seen a lot of issues over the years with people knocking the thrust bearing out of their cars, is I always check the clearance between the pads of the converter and your flex plate. And you normally want between like 3/16 up to an 1/8 inch of a clearance. I had nothing, and actually it wouldn't even go on the pads, so it was like negative 60 thousandths clearance. So your first thought there is what happens a lot is people don't get the converter seated all the way into the transmission. I was 99% sure I did, but I went ahead and pulled the transmission out. Nope, sure enough, it's seated all the way. So then I got the calipers out and started doing some measuring. And what I found, on this converter, the depth of this converter from this edge to the bottom of the converter is like 6 inches and 30 thousandths. On the JEGS converter, it's 5 inches, 5.9 inches, so 5 inches 900 thousandths, which is 130 thousandths short, meaning it's going to be not engaging into the transmission 130 thousandths less, which creates 130 thousandths less clearance at the flex plate. Well, there's our missing clearance, so that's a problem. So what it was actually doing, it was bottoming out on the end of the input shaft right here. I measured from the seal face down and from where my grease mark was out, and it could still go back 130 thousandths, but it was bottoming out on the input shaft. So after I figured all that out, I did a quick Google search, and honestly I went down a bit of a rabbit hole to find, some of you guys will remember Yellow Bullet. It's not used too often, but still some good information on there. I found Hutch on Yellow Bullet mentioned that this is a problem with billet converters in a 350 turbo, because most billet converters only have a depth of 5.850 to 5.9 inch depth. So that won't allow it to go all the way back for a 350 turbo. Now a 400, the input doesn't have the taper out on the edge, so it works just fine. So a 400 turbo doesn't have this taper, so it allows it to drop back further. Same thing with a Power Glide. So if you were to use that converter in a Power Glide or a 400 turbo, it's not an issue. Where you're going to come into an issue is a 350 turbo. Sure enough, that's the problem. Went on JEGS' website, and I actually found where someone else had wrote them on a review with this exact same issue, but they didn't really answer any. They didn't. I don't know if they didn't understand what he was asking, but their response was just, well, this converter should work. Well, it turns out it will not unless you run like a mid-plate spacer, or if you were to grind the front of that taper down, which I actually did. So I ground some of this taper down off of mine, and that allowed it to go back about 60 thousandths, but like I said, I really had negative zero, or negative clearance. So when I ground that down 60, it allowed it to get on the pads like it should, but it still didn't have enough clearance. I didn't want to continue to grind down because that's going to make it a pain in the butt when you don't have that taper on there to get the stator lined up in the converter. And that's actually exactly what it did, is it made it a real pain in the butt. So I stopped there. The solution at this point would be to run a mid-plate spacer, but that's just not what this car is, and I don't want to have to do that. That Summit converter will go right on, it'll go right back in. So I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Basically, the long story short is a cheap converter will work, but the more expensive billet style, at least from JEGS, will not work. But also, like I said, Hutch on Yellow Bullet was also saying he's seen this with other billet converters. I did see someone else that had a Freak Show billet converter had the exact same issue as well. So it really seems to just be an issue with 350 turbos with the billet converters. There is some variance in 350 turbo input drums, so that input shaft has more or less taper. So some people could be getting away with it if they have an input shaft that has a little bit less taper in it, basically is a little shorter. Also, I kind of wonder if some people are just putting them in and running them with no clearance, which, who knows? The other side of it is a lot of people, I guess, run mid plates, so they could be getting away with it that way. But if you are using a 350 turbo with a standard input and a billet converter, you're probably going to have issues with this. I think 9 times out of 10. But yeah, I just wanted to share that experience. I'm sending the converter back. It's actually boxed up in the truck. And at this moment, I'm not sure what I'm going to do. Kind of got this thing all tore apart. I think just because now I'm stuck, I'm going to go ahead and tear down the transmission. Just do a full inspection on it, because what was going to be a quick converter change is now like, well, I haven't gone through the transmission since I put the car together, so I might as well inspect that while I'm here. And that'll give me a little bit of time to kind of cool off and think about what my next move is. I normally get converters from BTE, and that might be what I do. I mean, the 95 Camaro turbo setup, it's got a really nice converter from BTE, and it works just fine. Like it's doesn't have any spacing issue at all. So I'm positive I could go to BT and just A, tell them what I ran into with the JEGS converter, but B, they've always just been good to me. So might go the BTE route, but that's going to be a custom order, so it's going to be down for a few weeks. So like I said, gives me an opportunity to go through the transmission. Not that I needed another thing to work on. I am completely swamped with stuff to work on, but that's how things goes. Hopefully this helps some people. Again, this is the JEGS XHD converters for a 350 turbo. Now they advertise them for a 350 turbo, a 400 turbo, or a Power Glide. I would bet if you run it on a 400 or a Power Glide, you'll have no issue. 350 turbo, I'm thinking 9 out of 10 times you're going to have an issue unless you have a mid plate. So hopefully this helps someone. Don't forget to like and subscribe.